If you were the leader of a country that isolated itself from the entire world, facing down the barrel of the most powerful gun in mankind's history, a gun that could turn your country into a radioactive hellscape in mere hours, it would probably want some type of insurance, wouldn't you? And I'm not talking about the kinds that denies you life-saving treatment. Americans will sure get the reference. I'm talking about a guarantee that if the enemy pulls the trigger, you'll be pulling your own. For the USSR in its final years, this was the RT-23 Molodets, a train that could launch nuclear missiles. Designed specifically to stay hidden from the United States' spy planes, the weapon system personified the needle in the haystack idiom, and down the line, it pushed forward a series of mobile launch platform ideas. Today it is of course decommissioned, but when it was in service, it was one of the most creative cards the USSR had up its sleeve, a guarantee that if the United States launched an assault on the USSR, the destruction would be mutual. This is the Soviet Doomsday train. And I had no idea how I'd never heard of this until we made this video. The need for mobile nuclear warheads. With the end of the Second World War, the United States and the USSR became the two greatest military forces in the world. At the time, the US was the only country in the world in possession of nuclear weapons, ones whose disastrous impact were recently demonstrated in Japan, and the USSR had to scurry to enrich their armory in the same way. With the Iron Curtain firmly cutting off the East from the West, the United States were unable to discern what exactly was happening in their rival's basement. Because of this, President Harry Truman greenlit reconnaissance overflights, daring spy missions with the sole goal of determining the status of the USSR's forces. These spy planes confirmed what many had already suspected. The USSR was well on its way to developing their own nuclear weapons. The Soviet atomic bomb project was massive, well-funded, and well-organized, and it resulted in, among other things, the creation of the Tsar bomber, the most devastating nuclear weapon ever tested. And fun fact, they only tested half its capacity. It could go up to 100 megatons. They only tested 50. The CIA devoted even more resources to digging through dirty Soviet laundry. Their intelligence-gathering missions were so successful that the Americans soon had a fairly accurate picture of all of the USSR's nuclear weapon sites. At the same time, the Soviets knew that the Americans knew where their weapons were, and, well, that presented a problem. If the Americans were to attack, they would attack the nuclear sites first, taking out the USSR's most powerful weapons and effectively ending the war in its opening stages. For the leaders of the USSR, this was obviously pretty unacceptable, and they needed a way to quickly develop their weapons to keep them away from American eyes, and, well, cue the nuclear trains, the Molodets. The design. Now, one of the most sensible solutions to the ever-present danger of American spy planes was to always keep nuclear warheads on the move, and the Molodets was one of the few ideas that became reality. The logic of Soviet commanders dictated that even if the USA did attack their nuclear silos, a mobile system would stay safe and they would be able to launch a counterattack. The train was to become the core of the USSR's retaliatory strike group. Now, the development of the combat railway missile system began in 1969, but it wouldn't launch until 1987. The Molodets was preceded by the smaller RT-2PM Topol, which is a missile system mounted on a really big truck. The system taught the USSR a few things about mobile platforms. For one, the system needed to be massive in order to carry and launch missiles of the size that nuclear missiles are. Topol was deployed from a transporter erector launcher, which was mounted on the 12-wheel 7-axle MAZ-7917, which is in essence a massive truck with a pretty unbelievable carrying capacity. To launch, the platform needed to be absolutely stable, and that required hydraulic drives, jacks, and cylinders. It also needed a command crew, and since they simply don't fit on the same vehicle, they had to follow the Topol around everywhere in a separate mobile command post. That crew obviously needed food, water, and logistics support, and so many moving parts presented a bit of a vulnerability. Now, at some point, someone realized that it would be a bit smarter to mount the missiles on a train, and thus the command decided to focus on the Molodets. It seemed like a more viable idea than a road mobile nuclear missile system for a whole bunch of reasons. Now, the most apparent selling point is the covertness of the system, which was the perfect answer to American reconnaissance missions. The Soviet railways were the largest unified railways in the world at the time, and that provided the Molodets with literally millions of places to hide. If the nuclear warheads were kept on the move at all times, it would be impossible for a spy plane to spot them. Now, the Molodets had another huge card to play, and that was in the form of camouflage. From a distance, it just didn't look any different from a run-of-the-mill passenger or freight train, which meant that American spy planes wouldn't be looking for a needle in a haystack. They would have to find a needle in a stack of really similar-looking needles. Another reason a train was, in theory, a bit of a better option than a large truck was simply because trains have bigger load capacities. At the time, the freighting capacity of a train with a single locomotive outmatched the carrying capacity of a truck by about 50 tons. This would allow the train in question to pull not only the missile system itself, but the crew car, a fuel reserve, and other components crucial to the system. This would make the entire system more compact, and with fewer moving parts, the likelihood of mission failure was drastically lower. Finally, even though a train is limited by the railway, unlike a truck, it could achieve speeds that a truck could only dream of. This will allow a train such as Molodets to cross vast distances in less time compared to the Topol. Brothers Vladimir and Alexei Utkin, chief engineers of the Yuhozhnaya Design Bureau, would take it upon themselves to design the Molodets system. Aside from the Molodets, the same people actually designed the SS-18, dubbed Satan by Americans. It's one of the most powerful and efficient intercontinental ballistic missiles ever created. They also, by the way, designed the Soviet space launch systems, which were slightly less demonic. The Molodets missile itself was a cold-launched, 3-stage intercontinental ballistic missile. It was armed with 10 warheads, each yielding 550 kilotons. For comparison, Little Boy, by the way, the bomb dropped on Hiroshima, yielded between 13 and 16 kilotons of TNT. The Tsar bomber, 50 megatons. And that's 1,000 kilotons. 50,000 kilotons.
Oh, those Russians.
Just a single Molodets warhead had an approximately 36 times greater yield, and the missile came with 10 of them. Each mobile railway system was equipped with 3 missiles. So, the Soviets, you could say they were pretty serious about retaliation. Now, the cold launch part of the system refers to the type of vertical launch used in a missile system. While hot launch systems propel themselves out of the launching cell or container by using their own engine, cold launching systems eject the missile from the tube and the engine activates mid-air, pushing the missile onward. The greatest advantage of a cold launch is its safety. If the engine malfunctions during a cold launch and the missile explodes, at least it's not stuck in the missile silo, significantly reducing the effects of the disaster. Additionally, a missile of Molodets' size couldn't be safely hot-launched within the confines of a train car, as it could damage the train itself. Even if it didn't destroy the car, it would put so much pressure on it, it would likely destroy the tracks. The multi-stage part of the Molodets means that the launch itself, specifically the propulsion, happens in stages. Now, to save you from listening to literal rocket science, we'll simplify it by saying that the propelling system uses different propellants and engines at different stages of the flight, which makes it easier for the missile to accelerate. The Molodets had an operational range of about 10,000 kilometers or 6,000 miles, which was more than enough to reach the US mainland from the USSR. The genius of the system, though, is found in its deployment and mobility, not just in its launching capabilities. The train consisted of not 1, not 2, but 3 locomotives and 17 rail cars. Once the Soviets realized that a train could haul considerably more weight than a truck, they quickly connected the dots and figured that it'd be smart for the same train to haul the entire command in charge of the missile. Even I could come up with that one. Therefore, the Molodets consisted of the following: 3 launching modules, each consisting of 3 cars for a total of 9 cars, a camouflage tank with fuel and lubricant reserve, a regimental command car, a communications car, a diesel generator car, a logistics car with water tanks, food and supplies, a dining car, rather thoughtful of them, and 2 separate living compartments for the 70-strong regiment. The 3 M62 diesel-electric locomotives were capable of achieving speeds between 80 and 120 kilometers per hour, and despite the weight of this incredibly heavy weapon system, the train could cruise on any Soviet rail line. The lead locomotive was driven by 3 railway troops officers who knew the patrolling routes well, while enlisted personnel operated the remaining 2 locomotives. The 3 missiles were kept in launch modules, each fitted into 3 cars which were connected to one another. Unlike the silo version of the Molodets, the train version of the missile used an inflatable nose cone to cover the top, as that was the easiest way to reduce the length of the missile and allow it to fit in the cars. The 3-car solution was implemented to relieve the pressure on railroad tracks. The engineers accurately predicted that the train would damage the tracks with the combined weight of a single launch car and the missile, which amounts to more than 200 tons, which is double the weight of a blue whale, by the way. I mean, you don't often see that sort of weight on a train. Fitting the missile into 3 connected cars distributes the weight across a wider platform, ensuring that the tracks remain undamaged. The roof of the cars would open if the missile was to be launched. The launching process itself, however, presented another issue for the engineers. The system lacked power to launch the missile. This is why an idea to turn the train into a nuclear-powered one was actually presented at one point, but it would never move further from the drawing board, which is a shame. Nuclear trains would have been kind of cool, wouldn't they? Actually, the idea for nuclear trains was actually quite lively in the 20th century, and if you want to learn more about it, we've actually got a video all about it, so that's fun, but finish this one first. Now, the problem was solved with the implementation of a short-circuiting mechanism that diverts the power from the overhead lines to the launching module. This also granted the Molodets a superpower, at least in terms of ICBM launching. Not only could this train hide the missiles anywhere in the USSR, it could launch from any single railroad section in the country with overhead power lines. This granted it mobility that silo-launched missiles just couldn't compete with. They would have to be in a silo, which is in the ground. To add to the overall camouflage of the train, every car was deceptively designed to look like a freight car. Ironically, the cars had a "for light loads" label on them, despite hauling hundreds of tons. To a passerby, Molodets looked no different from thousands of other freight trains in the USSR, which were, at the time, hauling mail and frozen fish across the country every day. If a person standing in front of the train couldn't differentiate it from a civilian train's, a spy plane certainly wouldn't be able to tell the difference either, and with that, the Soviets created the perfectly hidden nuclear missile system. In 1987, after years of testing, the first of the 5 Molodet systems started rolling across the USSR's vast railway network. How the Molodets operated. Aside from the test launches, the missiles in Molodets trains were never launched, and, well, that's good, because if they were launched, that would have been the end of the world, wouldn't it? By 1988, the USSR had deployed 5 Molodets trains, 4 were cruising in the Kostroma region, and a solitary train cruised in the Perm region. There were 3 missile divisions in operation by the time the Soviet Union dissolved. Each of these divisions operated 4 trains, formerly designated as missile regiments, which amounts to 36 ICBMs wandering around the USSR at any given point. And if that wasn't enough destruction, 360 additional warheads were stored close by to rearm the systems if they ran out of missiles. It would be a very bad day. They did their wandering exclusively during nighttime, and even then they bypassed large train stations. During the day, the trains would dig in behind pre-made, specially entrenched defensive positions. These locations were obviously hidden from the general public, and they were camouflaged from above so spy planes couldn't spot them. Once entrenched, the Molodets would open the roof of the launch cars and direct 104.5 tons of destruction, preparing to fire at any moment. And when the missiles were launched during the testing phase, they'd be ejected by the built-in power pressure accumulator to a height close to 50 meters, and only then would the first stage engine ignite. Since the missile was already reaching the heights of the Tower of Pisa when the engine ignited, there would be no damage to the rails or the launch complex. Although maintenance was required after every launch, the train required very little repairs during the testing phase. The weapon system and its crew could do this impressively quickly as well. Even if they received the order to launch while they were in motion, it would take them no more than 2 minutes to launch a death-bringing missile. With such careful operating procedures, the Molodets actually exceeded the expectations of its creators. According to Soviet calculations, even if the United States had launched 200 Minuteman missiles, which would amount to about 2,000 nuclear warheads, they would still only disable around 10% of all Molodet systems. In order to find and destroy the remaining systems, the Americans would have to employ at least an additional 18 reconnaissance satellites. This would greatly exceed the cost of all the remaining Molodets trains, and with that, the USSR won the economic side of this battle, at least in theory. Now, in 1991, the USSR agreed to restrict the patrol routes of their Molodets regiments, but the country dissolved soon after, and Russia quickly agreed to decommission all of the trains by 2003. As far as we know, Russia respected their side of the agreement and decommissioned and destroyed all weapon systems except for 2 launchers, which were installed as exhibits in St. Petersburg and in the History of Technology Park. They say that you can kill the man, but not the idea, and I suppose the same does apply to weapon systems because it was announced in 2011 that Russia is once again working on a railway-based mobile ICBM launch system. Now, the details of this are hard to pinpoint because, in case you haven't noticed, Russia's not exactly friendly with the rest of the world in the past few decades, at least this side of the world. What is, however, known is that the new combat railway missile system called Garrison was in development until 2017. Then, All info just went cold, and as far as the rest of the world was concerned, the project was halted due to lack of funds. At least that's the official story. The internet, however, speculates that Bargusian is alive and well. Testing was conducted in ultimate secrecy according to some sources, and 5 regiments of the Bargusian have been carrying 120 nuclear warheads across Russia's railways since 2020. Will we ever find out the truth? I mean, probably in a really long time in the future. Yeah. The American Molodets. Napoleon said to never interrupt the enemy when they're making a mistake, and the opposite... Russia didn't interrupt you, then Napoleon, did they? It's like, he's coming in winter. And the opposite side of that coin would be to copy your enemy when they're doing something right. And, well, the US tried doing just that. In 1986, President Reagan approved the plan to develop the American version of the Molodets called the Peacekeeper Rail Garrison. That'd be funny if the Russians called it Satan. Did the Americans somehow figure out what the Soviets were up to during the Molodets' testing phase, or did these two global superpowers think of the same thing at the same time? We don't know. What is known, though, is that the idea was the same. The train would roll across America's railways and retaliate in case of a Soviet attack. The Air Force planned to build 25 trains, each with 2 launchers, and supply the railway-based destruction force with 50 Peacekeeper missiles. I feel like they should create a new service branch, Train Force. The program began testing in 1990, and just a year later, the Soviet Union fell, and with that, the Cold War was over, which rendered the Peacekeeper Rail Garrison pretty useless. The project was scrapped, and the prototype car is now an exhibit in the US Air Force Museum at the Wright-Patterson Base in Ohio. The story of the Molodets is ironic. Even though the entire weapon system was built out of need for destruction, specifically retaliatory, vengeful destruction, it is a very creative solution. Somehow it manages to prove that destruction and creation can go hand in hand in some cases. In a less philosophical sense, it's kind of a testament to the Cold War era's craziness about just wanting to set the world on fire. Today's purpose is a bit more positive. This is a great reminder of how far humanity is willing to go when global superpowers are left unchecked.